I pulled into my mountain property, and someone else was living there. The first thing I saw was smoke coming out of my chimney. Not a little smoke either, thick enough to tell me somebody had been feeding my fireplace for hours. That should have been impossible. I'd bought that mountain house after the hardest year of my life, locked it up, and left it empty. But when I pulled into the driveway, the lights were on, a strange SUV sat by my porch, and a little girl ran past my front window like she belonged there. A few minutes later, an HOA president was standing in my doorway telling me my own house belonged to her family. What happened next uncovered a scheme that reached far beyond one cabin, one road, or one property line. It all came down to a deed nobody thought I understood. And before we get into it, if you enjoy stories about land rights, standing your ground, and ordinary people using facts instead of force, take a second to subscribe. Now let me tell you how I became a stranger on my own mountain. The first thing I saw was smoke coming out of my chimney. Not a little smoke either. A steady gray column rising above the pine trees and drifting across the ridge like somebody had been feeding logs into my fireplace all afternoon. I slowed my Ford F250 as the gravel road curved toward the property. For a second, I honestly thought I was looking at the wrong house. I hadn't been up there in nearly 3 months. The mountain house sat on 27 acres overlooking a small alpine lake tucked beneath the ridge. I'd bought it after my divorce finalized, mostly because I needed somewhere quiet where nobody knew my name and nobody cared about the wreckage I'd left behind. The place wasn't finished yet. The roof needed work. The deck needed repairs. Most of my furniture was still in storage. Nobody was supposed to be living there. Nobody. Rain tapped against the windshield while my headlights cut through the gathering darkness. Then I saw the lights. Every window glowed warm yellow. Living room, kitchen, upstairs, loft. Even the porch light was on. My stomach tightened. I eased off the gas and rolled farther down the driveway. That's when I saw the SUV black Chevrolet Suburban, parked beside my porch like it belonged there. I gripped the steering wheel harder. That vehicle sure as hell wasn't mine. The closer I got, the worse it felt. A shape moved behind the front window, then another. A child. Maybe 7 or 8 years old. She ran across the room carrying a stuffed rabbit before disappearing down the hallway. I stared through the rain-covered windshield. What was I looking at? Had somebody rented the place? Had the title company made some kind of mistake? Had I somehow bought a property somebody else still occupied? None of it made sense. I killed the engine. The truck settled into silence. For several seconds, I just sat there. The smell of wet pine drifted through the cab. Somewhere beyond the trees, wind pushed across the lake. Everything about the mountain felt exactly the same, except my house. My house looked like it belonged to somebody else. I climbed out and pulled my jacket tighter. Cold rain hit my face immediately. Mud sucked at my boots as I crossed the yard. The porch came into view. Then my stomach dropped. The lock was different. I stopped dead. 3 months earlier, I'd installed a heavy black steel deadbolt myself. The lock on the door now was brass. Bright. New. Not mine. I walked onto the porch. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I remembered wrong. I pulled my keys from my pocket anyway. The key didn't fit, not even close. Inside, I heard dishes clinking. Someone laughed. A television played somewhere deeper in the cabin. The sound hit harder than I expected. These weren't squatters hiding in an abandoned building. They were comfortable, settled in, living there. I knocked. Hard. The noise echoed through the house. Everything inside stopped. The television went silent. Footsteps crossed the floor. Then came the sound of locks turning. 1, 2, 3. The door opened halfway. A woman stood there. Mid-50s. Perfect blonde hair, expensive sweater. The kind of smile people wear when they think they're smarter than everyone else around them. I recognized her immediately. Diane Whitaker. HOA president. I had met her exactly once during closing week. She looked me up and down. Not surprised. Not confused. Annoyed. Like I was interrupting dinner. "You can't just show up here at night and scare children," she said. For a moment, I couldn't process the sentence. Rainwater dripped off my jacket. "What?" Her expression never changed. Behind her, I could see a fire burning in my fireplace. My fireplace. Family photos sat on the mantel. Not mine. Theirs. Then a younger man appeared behind her holding a coffee mug. Late 20s. Dark jacket. Relaxed. Comfortable. Like he'd lived there for years. "Mom?" he asked. Diane raised one hand without looking away from me. "It's fine, Tyler." Mom. Tyler Whitaker. Her son. I stared at both of them. "Why are you inside my house?" The younger man's eyebrows lifted. Diane folded her arms. The property sat abandoned for months. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. "I bought this place in August." Her smile tightened. "We were told ownership was unresolved. I have the deed." For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Gone almost immediately, but I caught it. She knew exactly what I had said, and she wasn't surprised. That bothered me more than anything. Most innocent people would have questions. Diane didn't. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Good," she said calmly. "You can explain that to the sheriff." She pressed a button. I stood there in the rain while she made the call. Not nervous, not worried, not confused. Comfortable. Like she'd rehearsed this moment. Like she'd been expecting me. And standing on my own porch while, the glow from my own living room spilled around her shoulders. One question kept pounding through my head. How long had she been planning this? The answer, I realized as Diane calmly spoke to dispatch, was probably much longer than I wanted to know. 20 minutes later, headlights appeared through the trees. A sheriff's cruiser rolled into the driveway and stopped beside my truck. Sheriff Wade Collins stepped out carrying a flashlight and a clipboard. I felt relief for exactly 3 seconds. Then I saw the look on Diane's face. She wasn't nervous. She looked prepared. "Evening, Sheriff," she said before he reached the porch, like they already knew each other. Collins nodded politely. Diane. That was the first bad sign. The second came when Tyler walked outside carrying a stack of envelopes. Not one of them looked surprised to see law enforcement. I handed over my driver's license immediately, then my deed packet. Closing documents. Title paperwork, property survey, everything. The sheriff stood under the sun, porch light flipping through the pages while rain tapped against the roof above us. Finally, he looked up. "You purchased the property 4 months ago?" "That's right." He nodded. The paperwork clearly supported me. I could see it. He could see it. Even Diane could see it. Yet somehow she still looked comfortable. Then she stepped forward. My family has been maintaining this property for months. Maintaining. Interesting choice of words. Tyler handed Collins a utility bill, then another, then a driver's license showing the cabin address. My stomach tightened. The sheriff studied those papers too. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "What exactly is this?" I asked. Diane answered before he could. "We established residency." I stared at her. "You broke into my house." Her expression didn't change. "That's your opinion." The sheriff exhaled slowly. I hated that sound. It was the sound of somebody realizing the situation had become complicated. He looked at me, then at Diane, then back at the paperwork. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully. The moment I heard my name spoken that way, I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "This appears to be a civil occupancy dispute." The words hit harder than I expected. "What?" He shifted uncomfortably. "You have ownership documents, exactly. They have documents claiming current residency." I laughed once, a short, angry laugh. "She changed my locks." "That may be true." "She moved into my house." "That may also be true." I stared at him, then removed them. Collins rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That's not something I can determine tonight." Diane lowered her eyes slightly, performing concern for an audience of one. "We were just trying to protect the property." I almost lost my temper. Almost. Then I noticed something. She wasn't arguing facts. She wasn't claiming ownership. She was hiding behind process. That meant she knew she couldn't beat the deed. She only needed confusion. Enough confusion to buy time. The sheriff handed my documents back. "I'm advising both parties not to escalate." Both parties. The woman inside my house and the man who owned it. Same category. The realization burned. Tyler smirked for half a second before turning away. I saw it. Diane saw me see it. Then the door closed. And just like that, they went back inside. My fireplace glowed behind the windows. My lights, my furniture, my house. The sheriff lingered beside his cruiser. "Get an attorney," he said quietly. "First thing tomorrow." Then he drove away. I spent the next 3 hours sitting inside my truck at the end of my own driveway, watching strangers move around inside my own home. Around midnight, the upstairs bedroom light turned off. Then the living room, then the kitchen. One by one, like a family settling into a perfectly normal evening. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I drove into town before sunrise. A diner near Fairplay opened at 5. I sat in a corner booth nursing bad coffee and rereading my deed. The ownership language was crystal clear. 27 acres, mountain house, lake access, ridge road, no disputes, no liens. Nothing. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Then I noticed the sender. Summit County Utility Services. I opened the email. The message was short. Account transfer confirmation. My chest tightened. The transfer request had been filed 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. I stared at the date. That was before I ever arrived at the property. Before Diane called the sheriff. Before our confrontation. Before anything. Someone had been building residency records long before I knew there was a problem. I looked back at the cabin address displayed on my screen, then at the filing date. A a cold realization settled into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even opportunistic. It was planned. Every utility, every document, every step, built carefully, weeks ahead of time, and suddenly one question became impossible to ignore. Why would someone spend this much effort creating a fake residency trail unless they expected the real owner to show up eventually? And if Diane knew I would come back, what exactly was she trying to accomplish before I did? That question stayed with me the entire drive out of town. The utility transfer wasn't the problem. It was the timing. Whoever filed it had started building a paper trail before I ever showed up at the cabin. That meant planning, and planning meant motive. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Mr. Mercer? The voice was older, male. Who's asking? There was a pause. My name is Hank Porter. I live on the ridge above Willow Creek. I recognized the area immediately. 3 cabins north of mine. Okay. Another pause. Then he lowered his voice. We shouldn't talk on the phone. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What do you know? Enough to tell you Diane Whitaker isn't surprised you're locked out. The line went quiet. Where are you? I asked. Feed store outside Fairplay. 1 hour. Then he hung up. No explanation. No goodbye. Just enough information to guarantee I'd show up. An hour later, I walked into an old feed store cafe attached to a grain warehouse. The place smelled like coffee, motor oil, and wet work boots. A dozen ranchers sat scattered around the room. Nobody paid attention to me. A man in a brown jacket lifted one hand from a corner booth. Hank Porter, late 60s, weathered face, gray beard, the kind of man who looked like he'd spent more time outdoors than inside. I sat down. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he slid a cup of coffee toward me. You really own that cabin? I pulled out a copy of my deed. He studied it carefully. When he finished, he leaned back and exhaled. Damn. Not exactly the reaction I expected. What? Hank shook his head. Then she lied. My pulse jumped. Who lied? Diane. I already knew the answer before he said it. At the HOA meeting 2 months ago, she told everybody the property was abandoned. I stared at him. What HOA meeting? The monthly board meeting. His eyes narrowed. She said the owner disappeared, claimed taxes weren't being paid, said the county was worried about the condition of the property. Every word was nonsense. The taxes were current. The county had never contacted me, and the property wasn't abandoned. I'd bought it legally. People believed her, I asked. Hank laughed without humor. Diane's been HOA president for 11 years. That explained a lot. Power doesn't always come from rules. Sometimes it comes from repetition. People stop questioning the person who's always talking. Hank stirred his coffee slowly. You need to understand something about Diane. I waited. You're not the first. A cold feeling settled into my chest. What does that mean? He looked around the cafe before continuing. 3 years ago, there was a retired veteran named Walter Briggs. The name meant nothing to me. Diane kept filing complaints against his property. What kind? Maintenance violations, fire risks, structural concerns. I could already see where this was going. Eventually, he sold. Hank nodded. For less than half market value. I leaned forward. And then? Diane's nephew bought it. There it was. The pattern. Pressure. Isolation. Acquisition. Hank took another sip of coffee. 6 months later, it sold again for profit, a lot of profit. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Outside, trucks rolled past the front windows. The feed store buzzed with normal life. Meanwhile, I was learning that the woman inside my house might have been running the same playbook for years. Then Hank said something that changed everything. I saw Tyler moving furniture into your cabin. My head snapped up. When? About a month ago. That was weeks before I returned. Weeks before the sheriff. Weeks before Diane claimed residency. You sure? I helped unload deliveries at the general store that day. Hank's voice hardened. I watched a trailer go right up your driveway. A trailer. Furniture. Before any occupancy claim existed. Before any dispute existed. The timeline no longer made sense, unless the move had been planned from the beginning. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Hank looked down at his coffee. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Because your father helped my family 20 years ago. That caught me off guard. He smiled faintly. Fixed our roof after a windstorm. Never charged a dime. For the first time all day, somebody felt genuine. No agenda, no performance, just truth. Hank reached into his jacket pocket. Then he slid a folded receipt across the table. I opened it. Storage unit. Local facility. Date from 5 weeks earlier. Tyler Whitaker's name was printed at the top. What is this? Hank looked directly at me. I watched him move furniture out of your cabin and into that storage unit. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Furniture. Out of my cabin. Before I even knew there was a problem. Suddenly, the utility transfers weren't the biggest issue anymore. Somebody had been inside my property for weeks, moving things, changing things, preparing something. And as I stared at the receipt in my hands, one thought became impossible to ignore. If Tyler was moving furniture before they officially moved in, what else had they already changed inside my house? I left the feed store with more questions than answers. But for the first time since arriving at the cabin, I had something valuable. A timeline. And timelines don't lie. According to Hank, Diane's family had been entering my property weeks before they claimed residency. According to the utility company, paperwork started weeks before that. Everything pointed to preparation, not confusion. Preparation. That afternoon, I drove back toward the mountain, not to confront Diane. That would accomplish exactly what she wanted. No. I needed evidence. Something she couldn't explain away. Something stronger than stories. I parked a quarter-mile from the cabin and cut through the trees instead of using the driveway. The property stretched across the ridge behind the house, climbing toward a maintenance shed near an old water collection system. As I hiked uphill, a memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, during my first inspection visit, black bears kept getting into construction supplies near the shed. I'd installed a wildlife camera, a cheap motion-activated trail camera strapped to a pine tree. After that trip, I'd forgotten all about it, and I stopped walking. Then turned toward the maintenance area. My pulse started quickening. Please still be there. The climb took 10 minutes. When the shed finally came into view, I spotted the tree immediately. And there it was. covered in dirt, half hidden behind branches, untouched. The camera was still attached. I hurried over and opened the compartment. The battery indicator flashed red. Barely alive, but alive. More importantly, the memory card was still inside. I pulled it free and headed back to the truck. By the time I reached town, I was sitting in a motel parking lot with my laptop balanced on the passenger seat. I inserted the card. Hundreds of files appeared. Most were useless. Deer, snowfall, wind, a fox. Hours passed. Then I found the date. 5 weeks earlier. My heart kicked. A vehicle entered the frame. Black Chevrolet Suburban. Diane's. I clicked play. There she was. Crystal clear, standing beside my cabin, not inspecting, not checking, directing. Tyler appeared seconds later carrying a toolbox. Another man unloaded equipment from a trailer. I watched in silence. Then Tyler walked straight to the front door. The video angle wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The old lock came off. A new one went on. I replayed it twice, then 3 times. There was no misunderstanding, no maintenance, no emergency. Tyler changed my lock. Weeks before they ever claimed residency. My stomach tightened, but the footage wasn't finished. The next clip showed something even worse. A mailbox. Brand new. Tyler mounted it beside the driveway. Then Diane handed him a stack of envelopes. One by one, he shoved them inside. Mail. Creating an address history, building evidence, manufacturing residency. The entire scam unfolded on my screen in silence. Every step planned, every step deliberate. I kept watching. Moving trucks appeared 3 days later. Furniture, storage bins, boxes, people carrying items through my front door. Then something stopped me cold. One of the chairs being unloaded belonged to my father. I recognized it instantly. Leather. Hand-stitched armrest. I'd left it inside the cabin wrapped in blankets. My hands clenched. They hadn't just entered my house. They had gone through my belongings. Piece by piece. The next video began automatically. Diane stepped onto the porch carrying paperwork. She pointed toward the ridge behind the property. The audio quality was poor, but not impossible. I turned the volume up. Tyler said something I couldn't make out. Then Diane answered. This time I heard every word. Once the ridge becomes available, everything changes. I froze. The ridge? Not the cabin, not the house. The ridge. I replayed the clip. Again. Same sentence. Same words. What the hell did that mean? The footage continued. More deliveries. More movement. More evidence. Then one final clip appeared. Diane stood near the porch looking directly toward the woods, toward the camera without realizing it. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. A confident one. The smile of somebody who believed they'd already won. The timestamp showed it clearly 3 weeks before our confrontation. 3 weeks before the sheriff arrived. 3 weeks before she claimed residency. The entire story she'd told was a lie. And now I had proof. I leaned back in the truck seat. For the first time since this nightmare began, the balance shifted. Not much, but enough. Because Diane Whitaker no longer had a story. I had evidence. Real evidence. The kind that survives courtrooms. The kind that destroys carefully crafted lies. But one question still bothered me. Why had she mentioned the ridge? I pulled up the property survey attached to my purchase documents. The cabin sat near the lower section of the land. The lake occupied the center. And beyond both, stretching toward the mountains, was the ridge. Most people would see trees, rock, wilderness, nothing special. Yet somehow Diane believed everything depended on it. And if she was willing to break into a house to get closer to that ridge, then whatever sat beyond it had to be worth a lot more than a mountain cabin. I stopped trying to understand Diane Whitaker emotionally. That was a waste of time. People like Diane didn't make decisions based on feelings. They made decisions based on leverage, and leverage always left paperwork behind. The morning after finding the trail camera footage, I hired an attorney. Lauren Briggs had spent 15 years handling property disputes throughout Summit County. The title company that handled my purchase recommended her immediately. When I walked into her office carrying a laptop, a deed packet, and 3 days' worth of evidence, she listened without interrupting. Then she watched the trail camera footage. Twice. The room stayed silent until the final clip ended. Lauren folded her hands. "Well," she said calmly, "that destroys any claim that this was an innocent mistake." For the first time since arriving at the cabin, hearing someone say that felt good. Not emotionally. Legally. There was a difference. I slid the utility transfer notice across her desk. Then Hank's storage receipt. Then copies of the HOA residency filings I'd pulled from county records that morning. Lauren examined everything carefully. The lock change alone is a problem for them. The fake mail? Bigger problem. The utility transfer? She nodded. Much bigger problem. Every answer felt like another brick being removed from the wall Diane had built. But Lauren wasn't smiling. That bothered me. What? She leaned back in her chair. Because none of this explains why she risked doing it. I thought about the ridge, about the footage, about the strange comment Diane made. Lauren opened the deed packet. Let's start with the property itself. For nearly an hour, we reviewed documents, surveys, transfer records, closing paperwork. Everything looked normal. Then Lauren stopped turning pages. Her eyes narrowed. What is it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled one document free from the stack. A survey attachment. One I barely remembered seeing during closing. Lauren studied it for another minute. Then she looked at me. This is interesting. I hated those words. Interesting usually meant expensive, or complicated, or both. She turned the survey toward me. Did anyone explain this section during closing? I looked at the highlighted area. No. The survey showed the cabin, the lake, the ridge. Nothing new. Then Lauren pointed toward a series of marked access routes running across the property. My property. What am I looking at? That's what I'm trying to figure out. She made a copy of the document and placed it beside several county maps she'd pulled from an online database. Then she compared them side by side, slowly, carefully. 5 minutes later, she frowned. That was the first real sign something mattered. What? Lauren tapped the map. Somebody's been looking at this property for reasons that have nothing to do with a cabin. My pulse jumped. The room suddenly felt smaller. Explain. She pointed toward the ridge boundary. Not yet. That wasn't the answer I wanted. But I knew enough not to interrupt her while she was working. Lauren spent another 20 minutes pulling records, county planning reports, land use maps, access easements, property overlays. Every new document seemed to make her more focused. Then she finally sat back. Diane isn't acting like somebody trying to steal a house. I nodded. Because I'd already started believing that. Lauren pointed toward the trail camera still image showing Diane standing near the ridge. She's acting like somebody trying to control something connected to the land. The distinction mattered. A lot. Because houses depreciate. Land corridors don't, especially in mountain communities, especially near future development. Lauren organized everything into folders. Evidence, occupancy claims, property records, HOA activity. Then she looked directly at me. From this point forward, you don't confront Diane. Trust me, I wasn't planning to. No phone calls. I nodded. No visits. Fine. No social media. Done. She slid a legal pad across the desk. We're building a record now. That phrase changed everything. Until now, I'd been reacting. Now we were building piece by piece. Fact by fact, evidence by evidence. The first formal notices went out that afternoon. Preservation requests, utility disputes, occupancy challenges. Nothing dramatic, just pressure, legal pressure, the kind that forced people to start making decisions. By evening, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, again. I answered. Nobody spoke immediately. Then a woman finally cleared her throat. Mr. Mercer? Yes. My name is Megan Foster. The voice sounded nervous. Very nervous. I work for the Willow Creek HOA. Every instinct told me to listen carefully. Megan lowered her voice. I think you need to know Diane's been talking about your property for months. I stood up slowly. Months. Long before anyone moved into the cabin. A chill ran through me, because that confirmed my worst suspicion. This had never been spontaneous, never been accidental, never been about protecting an abandoned property. It started long before I arrived, and somewhere inside the paperwork Lauren was reviewing, there had to be a reason. Then Megan said something that made my stomach tighten instantly. There's a file Diane doesn't want anyone to see. What file? Silence. Then a whisper. It's connected to the ridge. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear office noise in the background on Megan's end of the call. Printers, phones, people moving around. The normal sounds of an organization that had no idea one of its employees was about to change everything. What file? I asked. Megan hesitated. I don't have access anymore. That wasn't encouraging. But I saw the name. I grabbed a pen. What was it? Another pause. Then she answered. Ridge Development. Access Review. The words hit harder than I expected, because they sounded professional. Planned. Official. Not something created after my dispute began. Something that existed long before. When was this? Months ago. Months. Before Diane moved into my cabin. Before utility transfers. Before fake residency. Before any of it. The line went silent again. Then Megan lowered her voice even further. She talked about your property during board meetings. My pulse quickened. What did she say? Mostly that the ownership situation was uncertain. A lie. But one time she said something else. I waited. She said whoever controlled the Mercer parcel would control future access to the upper ridge. The Mercer parcel. My property. The call ended 5 minutes later. Megan refused to say more over the phone. Smart. If she was right, Diane had spent months building a narrative around land she didn't own. And that meant the answer was probably sitting somewhere inside county records. I drove straight to Lauren's office. She was still reviewing maps when I arrived. The moment I mentioned Megan's call, Lauren pulled several documents from a growing stack beside her desk. I think I found what Diane was chasing. That got my attention immediately. She spread 3 maps across the conference table. County planning maps, survey overlays, development proposals. At first glance, they looked like a mess of lines and colors. Then Lauren pointed toward the ridge behind my cabin. See this? I nodded. The county recently approved preliminary studies for recreational expansion. I frowned. What does that mean? Hiking access, private cabins, lake tourism, future development. My stomach tightened. The ridge wasn't empty wilderness. It was opportunity. And opportunity attracted money. Lauren traced one finger across the map. Every proposed access route converged in the same location. My property, the ridge road, the private easement included in my purchase. I stared at the map. You're telling me all of this depends on crossing my land? Exactly. For the first time, everything started making sense. The cabin had never been the prize. The ridge road was. Without that access corridor, development became dramatically more difficult, more expensive, possibly impossible. Lauren flipped to another survey, then another. Each one told the same story. Road access, lake access, utility corridors. Everything passed through the Mercer property. I looked back at the trail camera screenshot frozen on her monitor. Diane standing near the ridge, pointing, smiling. Now I understood why. She wasn't looking at a cabin. She was looking at leverage. Lauren opened another county file. This one included ownership records for neighboring properties. Several names meant nothing to me. One did. Whitaker Family Holdings. I pointed immediately. Diane? Lauren nodded. Through a family, LC. Interesting. Very interesting. The Whitakers already owned property bordering the ridge, which meant they stood to benefit from future development. A lot. Suddenly, the fake residency operation stopped looking reckless. It looked strategic. If Diane could create enough confusion around ownership, enough delay, enough pressure, maybe she hoped I'd walk away. Maybe she'd buy the property cheaply. Maybe she'd gain influence over the access corridor. Whatever the plan was, it started long before I arrived. Lauren leaned back. I think your cabin is sitting on top of something much bigger. The room felt very quiet. Not because of fear, because of clarity. For days I'd been chasing symptoms. The lock changes, the utility bills, the fake mailbox. Now I was finally seeing the disease underneath. Money, development, land control, the oldest motive in the world. Then Lauren reached for the original deed again. There is one more thing. I looked up. She tapped a paragraph buried deep inside the property description. A section I'd never paid attention to. The lake. What about it? She smiled slightly. For the first time since I'd met her. Your ownership includes water rights. I stared at her. How significant? Potentially very significant. She turned the map around. The alpine lake sat directly beneath the ridge corridor. Future development would need access, not just to roads, to water. And according to the deed sitting in front of us, those rights belonged to me. The realization hit like a freight train. The cabin, the ridge, the road, the lake, the water rights, the easements, everything connected, everything. And if I was finally seeing the whole board, then Diane wasn't just trying to steal a mountain house. She was trying to position herself between developers and millions of dollars in future access rights. Then Lauren closed the file, asked the question neither of us could ignore. If Diane benefits from this project, she paused. Who else does? That question stayed in the room long after Lauren asked it. Because if Diane was willing to risk fraud, break into a house, create fake residency records, and manipulate an HOA board, there had to be something bigger waiting on the other side. People don't take those risks for a cabin. They take them for money. The answer arrived the next morning. Megan Foster called again. This time she didn't sound nervous. She sounded scared. I need to meet in person. What's wrong? I found the file. My pulse jumped immediately. When? Last night. What's in it? A long silence. Then one sentence. You need to see it yourself. 2 hours later, we met in a parking lot outside a grocery store 20 miles from Willow Creek. Megan stayed inside her car. She never even turned the engine off. The second I approached, she handed me a flash drive. That's all I could get. I looked at the drive. What am I looking for? The folder, named Ridge Expansion Initiative. The words matched exactly what Lauren suspected. What is it? Megan swallowed. Everything. Then she drove away. No goodbye, no further explanation. Just gone. I called Lauren immediately. An hour later, we were sitting in her office with the flash drive plugged into her computer. Dozens of files appeared. Meeting notes, property maps, email chains, board discussions. Most of it looked boring. Until we opened the folder. Ridge Expansion Initiative. The first document carried a date from 6 months earlier, before I even purchased the property. Lauren began reading, then stopped, then read it again. What? She turned the monitor toward me. The memo came directly from Diane Whitaker. Subject: Strategic Access Preservation. My stomach tightened. Below it sat a sentence highlighted in yellow. Control of the Mercer Corridor remains essential for future development opportunities. Mercer Corridor. My property, my road, my ridge, my lake access. The next document was worse. Then another. Then another. The deeper we went, the uglier it became. Emails discussed occupancy strategies, ownership delays, access negotiations. One document outlined ways to establish residency before legal challenges could arise. Another discussed creating community support narratives. Lauren looked disgusted. They wrote this down. I couldn't believe it either. Most people smart enough to run a scheme like this don't leave records. Diane apparently believed nobody would ever challenge her. Then we found the email. The one that changed everything. It was addressed to 3 HOA board members. Subject: contingency planning. Lauren read it aloud. If ownership transfer remains active, temporary family placement may preserve future leverage over access rights. Neither of us spoke. The words hung in the air. Temporary family placement. That was their phrase. Not emergency housing. Not property protection. Placement. Like my house was a chess piece. Like my cabin existed to hold a position. The entire residency claim suddenly looked different. Not random. Not emotional. Strategic. Planned. Then Lauren opened another attachment. A map appeared. Highlighted routes crossed the ridge. Trails. Road proposals. Future utility lines. Every single one converged at the same point. My land. One red note sat near the center. Access dependent upon acquisition or control. I stared at the screen. There it was. The motive. Not hidden, not implied. Written plainly. Control. That was always the goal. Control the road. Control the ridge. Control the lake access. Control the future. Lauren leaned back slowly. This is conspiracy. I nodded. For the first time, we weren't piecing together clues. We were reading the plan itself. Then my phone rang. Unknown number again. I answered. Hank? His voice sounded urgent. Turn on local news. I opened a browser. A live community meeting was being streamed from Willow Creek. Diane stood behind a podium, smiling, confident, the same smile she'd worn on my porch. We are dealing with a dangerous property owner, she told the crowd. My jaw tightened. He has threatened families. Lie. He refuses to cooperate. Lie. Our community deserves protection. Lie. The comments section exploded with support. People believed her, or at least some of them did. Years of influence mattered. Years of relationships mattered. Diane wasn't defending herself anymore. She was preparing the battlefield. Lauren watched the stream for a minute before closing it. She's scared. I looked at her. That didn't look scared. It does to me. Lauren tapped the flash drive. Because she knows what happens if these documents become evidence. She was right. Diane had spent months controlling the story. Now the story was slipping away. And powerful people rarely surrender quietly. Then Lauren's email notification chimed. A new filing had appeared in county records. She opened it. Read it once. Then cursed under her breath. What? Lauren looked up. Diane just filed for emergency residency protection. The room went silent. Because we both understood what that meant. She was making her move first, and now the fight was heading somewhere neither of us could avoid. Court. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. 3 days. That was all the time Diane needed to launch a full public campaign, and she used every hour of it. The morning after filing for emergency residency protection, she posted a statement on the HOA community page. By noon, it had been shared across local groups. By evening, half the mountain seemed to have an opinion. According to Diane, I was a wealthy outsider trying to throw a family into the snow. According to Diane, she'd stepped in to protect an abandoned property. According to Diane, the entire dispute existed because I couldn't accept that people needed a place to live. Not a single word about changed locks. Not a single word about fake mail. Not a single word about the trail camera footage. The comments filled with sympathy. Some supported her. Some questioned the story. Most simply didn't know the facts. And that was the point. Confusion was Diane's favorite weapon. Wanted to respond. More than once I opened my phone. More than once I started typing. Every time Lauren stopped me. Let her talk. I hated that advice. It felt passive. Weak. But Lauren explained something important. She's building an emotional case. I nodded. So? We're building an evidence case. There was a difference. A huge difference. One wins online, the other wins in court. For the next 2 days, Lauren and I prepared. Every document was organized, every timeline verified, every piece of evidence duplicated. The trail camera footage existed in 5 separate locations. The utility records were certified. The HOA emails were backed up. Nothing was left to chance. Meanwhile, Diane grew louder. A local radio host interviewed her. She described herself as a grandmother caught in a property dispute. At another community meeting, she repeated the same story. Families, protection, safety, community. Not once did she mention development. Not once did she mention access rights. Not once did she mention the Ridge Expansion Initiative, because the truth would have destroyed the image she was selling. Then something unexpected happened. The pressure started affecting other people. Hank called me first. People are asking questions. That got my attention. What changed? Her story keeps changing. Interesting. Lies usually require maintenance. Truth doesn't. The next call came from Megan. Her voice sounded more confident than before. 2 HOA board members requested copies of the development files. I sat upright. Why? They heard about the hearing. For the first time since this started, cracks were appearing inside Diane's support system. Small cracks. But real ones. People had followed Diane for years because they trusted her. The moment evidence entered the conversation, trust became harder to maintain. That evening, Lauren received another document request. Then another. Then another. Some came from board members. Some came from property owners. Questions were spreading, and Diane knew it. The next day, she posted another statement. Longer, this time. More emotional. More dramatic. She claimed her grandchildren were frightened. She claimed I was harassing her family. She claimed the HOA was being targeted unfairly. When I finished reading it, I looked at Lauren. She's panicking. Lauren smiled slightly. No. What? She's campaigning. The distinction mattered. Panic is emotional. Campaigns are strategic. Diane wasn't collapsing yet. She was trying to win before evidence reached the courtroom. The problem for her was simple. Courtrooms don't care about popularity. They care about proof. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I doubted the evidence, because I understood the stakes. This wasn't just about getting my house back anymore. The cabin was one piece. The ridge was another. The lake rights, the access corridor, the development plans. Everything connected. If Diane succeeded, she gained leverage over one of the most valuable properties on the mountain. If she failed, the entire scheme could unravel. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. You have no idea how many people need that road. I stared at the screen, then showed Lauren the next morning. She looked at it for less than 5 seconds. Good. I frowned. Good. That means they're worried. She was right. Nobody sends warnings when they're winning. The hearing began at 9, and for the first time since I saw smoke coming from my chimney, Diane Whitaker wouldn't be speaking to neighbors, or social media, or the HOA. She would be speaking to a judge, and unlike everyone else she'd convinced over the years, a judge would be looking at evidence instead of stories. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. A few rows of chairs, county officials, several property owners from Willow Creek, 2 HOA board members. Hank sat quietly in the back. Megan arrived 5 minutes before the hearing started and avoided looking at Diane completely. That alone told me plenty. Diane entered with Tyler and an attorney I'd never seen before. She looked confident, professional, calm. The same expression she'd worn the night she answered my front door. The same expression she'd worn while calling the sheriff from my porch. She still believed she controlled the narrative. Judge Raymond Ellis entered exactly at 9. The room stood, then sat. And the hearing began. Diane's attorney spoke first. Of course he did. He described a family attempting to preserve a neglected property. He described a community effort. He described concern for safety. He described residency. Not once did he mention changed locks. Not once did he mention fake mail. Not once did he mention development plans. When he finished, Diane took the stand. Her performance was impressive, carefully measured, emotional when necessary, reasonable when useful. My family simply wanted to help. Lauren made a note. Diane continued. The property sat empty. Another note. We believed ownership was uncertain. Another note. Then Diane made the mistake Lauren had been waiting for. The cabin had, effectively, been abandoned. Lauren stood immediately. No further questions on that statement, Your Honor. Judge Ellis looked up. Proceed. Lauren wheeled a monitor toward the front of the room. Then she pressed play. The trail camera footage appeared on screen. Nobody spoke. They watched Tyler remove my lock. They watched the new lock installed. They watched the mailbox appear. They watched envelopes being placed inside. One by one. The room became very quiet. Then the footage showed Diane standing beside the cabin weeks before residency was claimed. The timestamp filled the corner of the screen. Impossible to dispute. Impossible to explain away. Diane's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Lauren wasn't finished. Next came the utility transfer records, then the county filings, then the storage receipt Hank provided, then the HOA emails. Each document landed like another hammer blow. The judge reviewed them slowly, methodically. No drama, no emotion, just facts. Exactly where Diane was weakest. Then Lauren opened the Ridge, Expansion, Initiative files. The room changed. Because this wasn't about occupancy anymore. Now it was about motive. Lauren displayed the email discussing temporary family placement, then the access maps, then the strategic planning documents. Judge Ellis read every page carefully. Finally, he looked toward Diane. Mrs. Whitaker. For the first time all morning, she looked uncertain. Yes, Your Honor. Did you authorize these communications? Silence. A long silence. Her attorney leaned toward her. Too late. The hesitation itself answered the question. We believed community interests were involved. Judge Ellis didn't respond. He simply turned another page. Then Lauren stood one final time. Your Honor, there is one document we haven't discussed. She reached into a folder. The original deed. My deed. The same document I tried showing the sheriff the first night. Lauren unfolded the survey attachment and placed it before the judge. Please note the easement schedules. Judge Ellis adjusted his glasses. The room waited. Lauren pointed toward the ridge road, then the lake, then the corridor maps, one by one. The Mercer property controls access to the upper ridge. The judge nodded slowly. I see that. Lauren continued. Future development routes cross Mr. Mercer's land. Another nod. Water access routes depend upon those easements. A third nod. Then she delivered the final piece. Mrs. Whitaker's family cabin also relies upon that same access corridor. The room went completely silent. Tyler looked toward his mother. Diane stared at the map. The confidence disappeared from her face for the first time since this started. Judge Ellis looked directly at her. Is that correct? No answer. Her attorney finally spoke. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. No. Silence again. Then came the question. The one that changed everything. Judge Ellis tapped the deed. Mrs. Whitaker, were you aware that the property you occupied controls the primary access route to the upper ridge? Diane didn't answer immediately, because there was no safe answer. If she said yes, motive became obvious. If she said no, the emails destroyed her credibility. The pause lasted only seconds. It felt much longer. Then she quietly said, I may have been aware. The room reacted instantly. A few gasps, a few whispers. One HOA board member lowered his head. Another leaned back in his chair like he suddenly wanted distance from the entire situation. Judge Ellis closed the file. Slowly, carefully. Then he looked at the evidence one final time. And in that moment, I knew Diane Whitaker had lost. The only question left was how much it was going to cost her. Judge Ellis returned his attention to the evidence. The room remained silent. No one seemed eager to speak anymore. Not Diane, not her attorney, not even the HOA board members sitting behind her. For nearly 5 minutes, the judge reviewed documents without interruption. Then he closed the file. Based on the evidence presented today, he said, the court finds substantial grounds to question the legitimacy of the residency claims associated with this property. Diane's shoulders stiffened. Judge Ellis continued. Emergency residency protections are suspended immediately pending further investigation. The words landed like a hammer. Tyler lowered his head. Across the room, one of the HOA board members quietly stood and walked out. Nobody stopped him. The judge wasn't finished. Control of utilities is hereby restored to Mr. Mercer. Another pause. County property enforcement is authorized to supervise recovery of the residents. I finally exhaled. For the first time since seeing smoke rising from my chimney, I could see an ending. Not because somebody believed me, because the evidence spoke for itself. Then Judge Ellis delivered the final blow. This matter is being referred for review regarding potential fraud, misrepresentation, and interference with lawful property rights. The room erupted into whispers. Diane closed her eyes briefly. just briefly. But I saw it. The realization. The understanding that the fight she'd spent months controlling was now outside her control. The hearing ended 10 minutes later. As people filtered out of the courtroom, nobody approached Diane. Not the board members, not the property owners, not the supporters who once repeated her talking points. People suddenly became very interested in leaving. Funny how quickly influence disappears when facts arrive. Outside the courthouse, Lauren handed me a copy of the ruling. You did exactly what you needed to do. I looked at her. Stayed patient. She smiled. Stayed documented. That was a better way to put it. Patience alone doesn't win. Evidence does. 2 days later, Sheriff Wade Collins met me at the bottom of the mountain road. His attitude was very different from the first night. Back then, he'd seen uncertainty. Now he carried a court order. A locksmith waited nearby. So did a county property officer. Nobody expected problems. Still, everyone wanted things done correctly. The drive up the mountain felt strangely quiet. When we reached the cabin, Tyler was already loading boxes into the Suburban. Diane stood on the porch. No smile, no speeches, no confidence, just exhaustion. The sheriff approached first. Mrs. Whitaker, the court order is now active. She nodded once. Nothing more. No argument, no performance, no audience remained to perform for. Movers carried the final containers out of the house. One of them handed me a familiar green tackle box. My father's. The same one I'd seen in the trail camera footage. I took it carefully. Some things matter because they're valuable. Others matter because they're yours. This one was both. Tyler eventually walked over. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at the ground. I should have stayed out of it. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was honest. And honesty had been rare lately. I think you know that now, I said. He nodded, then walked away. An hour later, the locksmith removed the brass deadbolt, the same one that stopped my key from working the first night, the same one that turned me into a stranger on my own property. A new lock clicked into place. The sound was small, but it felt important, permanent. The sheriff handed me the keys. This should do it. I thanked him. Then everyone left. Just like that. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. No final speech. The mountain swallowed the noise and moved on. I stepped inside the cabin alone. The place smelled different. Different cleaning supplies. Different food. Different people. But underneath all of it, the cabin was still there. The stone fireplace, the pine walls, the view of the lake through the windows. Home waiting underneath the mess. I spent the rest of the afternoon putting things back where they belonged. My father's photograph returned above the fireplace. The leather chair returned beside the window. The tackle box returned to its corner near the stairs. Piece by piece, room by room, ownership becoming reality again. A week later, Lauren called. County investigators had officially opened inquiries into HOA activities connected to several prior property disputes. 2 board members resigned. Additional complaints surfaced. Questions spread quickly. Apparently, I wasn't the only person who had felt pressure over the years. I was just the first one with enough evidence to force people to look. That night, I sat on the porch overlooking the lake. The ridge stretched across the horizon beyond the water. The same ridge Diane thought she could control. The same ridge that nearly cost me my property. and the same ridge that ultimately exposed everything. The funny part was that none of it came down to who had the loudest voice, or the most influence, or the biggest audience. In the end, it came down to a deed, a survey, a trail camera, a handful of documents, truth preserved long enough to be heard. The mountain didn't care about rumors. The county didn't care about popularity. And the law didn't care who chaired the HOA. It cared about evidence. As darkness settled over the lake and the lights inside the cabin reflected against the windows, I thought about the first night I arrived. The smoke, the strangers, the changed lock, the feeling of standing outside my own house. Then I looked toward the ridge one last time.
Diane thought she was stealing a mountain house. What she never understood was that the disc controlled the entire ridge. If there's the lesson I take away from this story, it's that patience matters most when you attempt to rush. When you found danger living in my cabin, every instinct told me you argue louder, push harder, and fought an answer. But none of that would help to solve the problem. What made the difference was keeping recourse, follow the facts, and letting the two have time to catch up. The disc, the trail camera, the documents, and the evidence were on there from the beginning. It just had to stay steady long enough to find them. That's something worth remembering, whether you are dealing with property, family matter, business, or any challenge life threw your way. Sometimes strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it's about staying calm when everything around you feels uncertain and trusting that the truth still matters. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where paperwork and patience end up mattering more than arguments? If so, drop a yes in the comments. And if you ever had to stand your ground respectfully when something important was on their line, share your story below. And if you enjoy stories about land rights, quiet perseverance, and everyday people standing up for what's right through legal means and common sense, make sure to subscribe. There's plenty more story ahead. I'll be glad to have you along for the journey.